Welcome to today's interview. Today, we're really lucky to be joined by Professor and Dr. Reza Zia-Ebrahimi, a historian of Islamophobia and antisemitism and reader in the history of nationalism and race at King's College London. So, welcome, Dr. Reza Zia-Ebrahimi.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. And today we will be talking about Iranian dislocative nationalism and the curious phenomenon of monarchist Zionism that became quite, it feels especially timely right now, because over the past weeks, we've seen yet another wave of war and destruction unleashed by Israel. And I think that the figure of Reza Pahlavi became very prominent also among non-Iranians that got really interested in all the dynamics in the diaspora, but also within Iran, and how that relationship with Zionism and everything in Israel has been ongoing both inside Iran and outside Iran. And so considering the current time frame, I think it's always useful to take a step back and go and see where these things are rooted. And it's very nice to have you here and be able to know more about your research and about what you mean by dislocative nationalism. And I would start with one question, and this is not very much of a question, it's more of asking you to provide us a general historical framework of when the dislocative nationalism phenomenon actually began in Iran. Who was ruling Iran, what foreign powers were influencing the country, and so on. So if you can provide us that, and then we can go and unpack what dislocative nationalism is in your research and in your book, The Emergence of Iranian Nationalism.
Thank you, Tarajan. Yes, of course. So let's start with the historical context. So we are in I would say, the mid-19th century. The context is the advent of Western modernity, which is shaped by colonialism, capitalism, and whiteness. And it has got epistemologies of its own that are based on the ethnic nation and on a racial division of humankind. As far as Iran is concerned, so in the early 19th century, we have a very traumatic historical encounter with Western modernity, primarily through military confrontation with Russia, and later on with British colonialism. This encounter leads to military defeats and some territorial annexations, primarily by Russia, and it really shakens the sense of security of the Iranian elites at the time, I think it's fair to say. And so you have different responses to this historical transformation, this discovery of this Western European other, which seems to be extremely powerful, at least militarily. The first response is called Iranian modernism, Nesat Tajaddud, which is essentially a program of state reform. And it is associated with thinkers such as Mostashar-ul-Dawleh, Malcolm Khan, and so on. And it leads to the constitutional movement and constitutional revolution in 1906, 1911. And this Iranian modernism is oftentimes presented as, Western or shaped by Western ideas, because generally, as part of Western epistemologies, anything positive happening anywhere in the world is coded as necessarily influenced by the West in some way or the other. And this is something that I disagree with. I think that the constitutional revolution and even the ideology of constitutionalism are tremendously indigenous in their in the practices and also in the conceptual frameworks. So much more perhaps than we had realized to this day. So that's the first response to military defeats against the Russians and later the British. The second response is what I call dislocative nationalism, which is very much a minority view for a very long time. And this is this is a thought that has completely internalized Western racial categories and Islamophobia. And this is something that I associate with thinkers such as Mirza Fatali Akhundzadeh, who was an agent of Russian imperialism in the Caucasus and who had internalized a specifically Russian form of Orientalism and Islamophobia. And to a lesser extent, another thinker called Mirza Awakhan Kermani. Now, the question is, how can a non-white people internalize racial thought and Islamophobia? Well, it's partly due to a quirk in European racial thought, which is the opposition between the Aryan and the Semitic races, which plays a very important role in European antisemitism, and is essentially based on ideas of linguistic similarity. So the fact that Indo-European languages have some display some similarities is coded in this typically 19th century ideology as
racialization. Yeah.
So linguistic similarity is racialized, if you will. And the Semites are, of course, the Jews and the Arabs. I think the inclusion of Iranians into the Aryan race category was not intentional, and I think it's important to stress that the ideologues of Aryanism never thought of Iranians as fully fledged Aryans. So that's the first reason for this bizarre uptake of racial thought. The second reason is that this was also made possible by the fact that Iran was never formally colonized. So while we were dominated by Russia and Britain throughout the 19th century and beyond, we did not live under a colonial racial system that, pushed down racial domination down the throats of Iranians. So, unlike India, unlike Algeria, Palestine,
of course.
So in some ways, our elite thinkers were not vaccinated, if you will, against European racism. So, in the same way as I disagreed with the portrayal of Iranian modernism as influenced by the West, which I think is really wrong, I also disagree with the portrayal of this form of nationalism as indigenous. But I think that is wrong too. The very idea of the ethnic nation, the very conceptualization of race, the racialization of Islam, and the profound Islamophobia that we are dealing with, these are all highlights of European modern epistemologies. So just to finish on this, I would say that modernism for a long time and the constitutional kind of ideology had the upper hand, and dislocative nationalism hardly had any impact. But there is a historical turn around the years 1910s, where the constitutional revolution and the outcome, the state that is the outcome of the constitutional revolution, is very much discredited and seen as weak. So gradually, the program of state reform, this insistence on rights and conditioning royal power, all these things become discredited, and there's a turn towards racial nationalism with its twin sibling, which is authoritarianism. So suddenly, the dislocative nationalist ideas of Akhundzadeh and Kermani are not rediscovered, but discovered. And this has a great deal of influence on the emergence of the Pahlavi state. So it's an important turn. And the Pahlavis will do what they can to annihilate the remnants of constitutionalism. So the Pahlavi program of modernization internalizes colonial frames of thought. So we were not formally colonized, as I always say, but we were ruled by elites whose minds had been colonized, a little bit like Kemalist Turkey. But what is perhaps unique and or strange about dislocative nationalism is this belief that out and out Westernization is somewhat nationalist, indigenous, that it's some sort of return to the nations, to Iran's purity. So this is a case of ideological gymnastics that only dislocative nationalism can allow.
So this dislocative nationalism was born in a time frame that it wasn't actually, I would say, widespread, or it was very much connected to some specific ruling elites. When did it become, and how did it turn into a very pushed, national identity? When was it pushed so much on people, maybe in schools and in usually nationalisms are based on a lot of tropes, and how did it emerge, and in what ways, I guess, the Pahlavi dynasty did it push this form of nationalism down that was very interestingly opposed to other forms of nationalism that were towards Iranian sovereignty. So the sovereignty of the people in the face of despotism, but also imperialism that was emerging on the other hand. So how was this? How did the Pahlavi dynasty, try to impose this form of nationalism?
So that's a very good question. So as I was saying, in the years 1910s, you have a gradual conversion of the elites to dislocative nationalism, and also a belief that what we need is a strong leader. So you have people such as Sayed Zia, who supports the emergence of Reza Khan as a military leader, who then gets rid of the last Qajar king and crowns himself Shah of the new Pahlavi dynasty in 1925. What happens is that, so unlike some accounts, Reza Shah was not completely illiterate, but he was not a man of culture. He was, he was simply a military or Cossack officer. However, he had around himself a group of individuals that were completely committed to dislocative nationalism and who would give him literally daily lessons, educate him in the history of Iran from that dislocative nationalist lens, and converted him. So gradually you start to see dislocative nationalism infiltrating, official ideology and state discourse. You can see that in the millenary celebrations of Ferdowsi, for instance. You can see that in the architecture of the time. Just look at Banque Melli, for instance. It's 1930s neo-Persian architecture, and architecture that tries quite literally to bring Iran back to its pre-Islamic past. And importantly, it becomes completely integrated into the curriculum of the newly created mass schooling system. That's how you have an ideology, a nationalist ideology that starts permeating society. Essentially, the ideas of dislocative nationalism are drilled into the brains of Iranians for several generations, and I would argue still to some extent today.
You see it coming out sometimes, yeah.
Yes,
even in the Islamic Republic, yeah. You sometimes see it, yeah.
I mean, you look at the school textbooks, and I've done that, so I looked at them quite extensively, and they are hardly different from those of the Pahlavi era when it comes to history and those subjects in primary and secondary school, where the history of the nation and its culture is described as part of education. The only thing that has changed is that now Shia Islam has been, added to the mix, if you will. But the idea of the Persian nation, primordial, always there, eternal as it were, surrounded by enemies, it's still very much there. So that's how dislocative nationalism becomes part of the official ideology of the Pahlavi state.
And how would you describe dislocative nationalism to someone who doesn't know what it actually is and what its tropes are? Like someone who believes, who has this form of dislocative nationalism, what do they actually say? Like, for example, some historical, inaccuracies. If you can give us some examples. I could make some, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we all can, and I think we know what we're talking about. So I struggled first, with theorizing this, and I came up with the idea of dislocation. So what do I mean by that? I mean that what dislocative nationalism does is that it dislodges Iran from its observable reality. So without trying to make any generalization, I think that we can agree that Iran is a fluid geocultural and state that you find historically situated in the Middle East, with deep connections with the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent and Central Asia and other parts of the world, with a vast majority of its inhabitants historically professing Islam, though it is, of course, a bit more complicated today. So dislocative nationalism literally dislodges Iran from this reality by presenting it as racially akin to Europeans and somehow being out of place. And I think that this is very much epitomized in Mohammad Reza Shah point made in the 70s that Iran's situation in the Middle East is an accident of geography. I think it's the fascinating case of the denial of a reality that is there for everyone to observe. What dislocative nationalism also does is that it racializes Islam. So building on this Aryan versus Semitic dichotomy, the historical process whereby the inhabitants of the Iranian plateau gradually adopt Islam, which is a very complex history over several centuries, is crudely reduced to an Arab invasion. So it's very much, racialized as, something that the Arabs have done, given that obviously Islam is racialized as a product of the Arab Semitic mind. And this reduction is necessary to fit this complex history into kind of like neat modern racial categories of Aryan, Semitic, Persian, Arab, and so on and so forth. Of course, the reality is that these modern categories are of no use at all to make sense of pre-modern history, and that's not how the people who lived at the time thought. And as historians, we know that local Persian-speaking elites, in fact, played an important role in the diffusion of Islam eastwards. So in this operation of dislocation, language is also very important. Because language is a proxy for race, right? The Arab invasion is portrayed as an attempt to impose the Arabic language on us, and then we are, praised for our heroism in resisting that. And so the survival,
Shahnameh and the romantic vision of Shahnameh.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll come back to it, but I mean, importantly, the survival of the Persian language is portrayed as the surest sign of nationalism. As a sign that we came out of 2 centuries of silence, as Zarin Kub used to say. Then again, the reality is very different. Persian can be seen as the second language of Islam. Modern Persian, its history is that it develops as an administrative language in the Sasanian center in today's Iraq, in fact. So this is Middle Persian. So those elites that embrace Islam in those areas then take their language and take it alongside Islam eastwards to the eastern parts of the Iranian world towards today's Afghanistan and Central Asia. So as a result of this, modern Persian comes to supplant other Iranian languages that were spoken in that part of the world. Languages such as Sogdian and Bactrian and Khwarezmian that are today dead languages, supplanted by Persian. So I'm not sure whether it's a good or bad thing. I think it's besides the point, but it happens not despite Islam, but thanks to Islam. And so in some, dislocative nationalism is dislocative because it is based on a highly distorted system of knowledge that distorts Iranian reality because it is European, because it emerges as part of European modernity to support the colonial endeavors of Europe, not Iran's. That's why it cannot reconcile itself with Iranian history, and it goes on to distort it.
And it was also perhaps emerging from the trauma, as you said earlier, of this encounter with foreign powers. Is thinking of Iran in a, for example, going back to the ancient empire and good old times, that are often romanticized and are not seen clearly because you jump from the ancient empire and you just forget about a few thousand years and you come to the 20th century or to the, 19th century. So you forget about all that part. And is that somehow a way of wanting to just say it's other people's fault? It's the Arabs' fault. They invaded us, Islam came, and that's the backwardness that we have is from Islam. If we didn't have Islam, it would still be this huge empire and be akin to these European modern countries, but it was Islam that brought us back. Is that also because of the trauma that, this foreign encounter with foreign powers had on Iranians and on those elites? Does that have an impact on them?
I mean, absolutely. I think you just nailed it there. Dislocative nationalism, what explains its universal uptake and its success since its birth, even though the kind of like the Western background of its system of knowledge has changed a great deal, but since the 19th century. The Aryan race and so on. Nobody really talks about that anymore. But, Iranians have preserved it in some ways because it plays a very important role. It makes sense of the 19th century Iranian predicament, which is that of backwardness. This is not my judgment of 19th century Iran. I'm actually a very big fan of 19th century Iran for reasons. But this is how those thinkers saw Iran. We are backwards. This challenge is insurmountable. This military adversary is impregnable. What shall we do? And of course, dislocative nationalism comes in very handy in making sense of this, given that, I call it a European handshake. So, it's a little bit like, imagine a European colonial orientalist, orientalist thinker or scientist that comes and shakes your hand and tells you, you know what, you're part of the same race as we are. And I'm going to explain to you what happened and why it is that you are backward. It is obviously, the fact that you've been contaminated with Semitic filth in the shape of Islam. This really strikes these thinkers, and it produces this idea that the panacea, what will return Iran almost automatically into its ancient pre-Islamic glories is not state reform or any such thing. It is simply uprooting Islam, which is the product of the Semitic mind. Hence, all these attempts that, when you think of it, dispassionately, can possibly not have any impact on the daily lives of Iranians or on the status of Iran in the world. But these constant attempts to eliminate Arabic loanwords, which is essentially transforming Persian into a completely engineered new language, and it's also cutting us off from our ancient literature, including Ferdowsi, ironically. So it's this idea that we need to uproot Islam, and that's all we need to do. And then, as if by magic, we will be returned to the glories of Cyrus the Great and Persepolis and whatnot. And it's with this type of idea that Reza Shah literally bans the Islamic practices of ta'ziyeh, of veiling, of course, and all the external manifestations of Islam. That's why, well, he was not great on linguistic purification, but this linguistic purification is, it's all over us.
Yes, totally. It's still there today. You, when you go to Iran and study Farsi, the first thing they're gonna teach you is like these letters are, in Persian. These letters are in Arabic words. So, try to use the Persian words and all. And I was like, I don't really study other languages thinking about this. Like, I don't think about, all languages have this contaminations. You can't go back and trace where things begun. So I never saw the point in all this, and I always thought it was such a waste of time. And it's quite
Absolutely.
crazy.
I mean, languages are organic and they develop in a manner that is fluid, over centuries. And the Persian language has developed as the modern Persian language that we speak today, as part of that historical process that I referred to earlier, as one of the languages of Islam and a lingua franca in its own right, which was supplanted by English in India only in the 19th century. It was, the language of the elites of an entire area that you would call Islamicate, from the Balkans to the to the gates of China. So these these neat categories of Iranian, Arabic, Semitic, Aryan, and so on. These ideas emerge only with nationalism. But what is saddening is that in my view, one of the greatest richness of the Persian language is continuity. It's a language that has been so codified that we can read texts that are 1,000 years old and come from other parts of the world and still understand them. And this Farsi Sari, this elimination of Arabic loanwords, it is producing an engineered pidgin language that doesn't have a history, that is entirely new, and that cuts us off from this cultural heritage. So strangely enough, thanks to dislocative nationalists, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren perhaps will not be able to read the Shahnameh anymore.
It's unbelievable. And since you mentioned the Shahnameh, there's a sort of nationalist view on Shahnameh that is, in my view, very much linked to dislocative nationalism, because you see people having this reinterpreting and re-seeing a masterpiece of our literature, which is Shahnameh, and viewing it as a step towards this nationalist identity, getting rid, like the way that I heard people talking about it is, we united Iran under one language with Shahnameh, and we got rid of the Arab domination. So this is the trope that it's often sold with Shahnameh. What is your response to that? Just to give people an idea of what it's a very practical way to understand what dislocative nationalism is.
Yes, I mean, our historical, literary, cultural archive is re-engineered to fit into the kind of like the model of dislocative nationalism. And you're right to highlight the important role that Shahnameh plays in this. So the Shahnameh, our national epic, the Book of Kings, is presented as a nationalist, anti-Arab, anti-Islam project written in pure Persian without any Arabic loanword, which is, of course, nonsense. I mean, for one thing, there are Arabic loanwords. I mean, there are studies about Arabic loanwords in the Shahnameh. Moreover, Ferdowsi is a Muslim poet. He makes his devotion to Shia Islam and Imam Ali in particular very clear in the introduction, which is biographical. All right. And then in terms of, the anti-Arab stance, we are told that, we're time and again referred to that one verse in which one of the characters, not Ferdowsi himself, so a Persian commander, calls the Arabic speakers or the Tazian lizard eaters. And so this is presented as, the timeless, animosity between Persians and Arabs.
Sadly.
But, there are large sections that are ignored, particularly the Bahramgur episode, where those same Tazian, Arabic speakers, are portrayed very positively and praised. So it's very difficult to force something like the Shahnameh into these modern ideas of us and the other. And also, don't forget that the Shahnameh is written in modern Persian in the eastern part of the Iranian world, and that unique event is made possible by Islam, because the roots of the modern Persian language are in the West. So how does Persian travel to the East? It's thanks to Islam. Very briefly, just to say that there are, the Shahnameh is not the only case. There are also ancient occurrences of the term Arya that are presented as solid proof and evidence that Iran is this primordial, timeless nation. in its current shape since the dawn of time. So you find the term Arya in Avestan sources, for instance, but also in ancient inscriptions such as Nasher-Rostam, for instance, in which King Darius or Darius describes himself as Arya of Arya stock. Now, what is important to bear in mind is that Arya then and the Aryan race today are obviously two completely different things. The Aryan race is a European idea born in the 19th century, you know, but as far as ancient Arya is concerned, there's frankly no consensus on what it actually meant. And moreover, its meaning shifts over time. Sometimes it seems to be an ethnonym, so used to refer to a group of people. On other occasions, it's a caste or social class, or a language, or a political category. But in no incidence of the ancient term is it claimed or suggested, or it can be inferred that it's a term that describes the entire population from northern India all the way to Western Europe. That idea just simply doesn't exist. So it's an anachronistic reading of ancient history.
I always thought it was very weird to hear Iranians keep claiming that, Iran, it means that we are Aryans, therefore we're an Aryan race. And I was like, this is not something you would want to say in Europe. Like, this is not a nice thing to say. It's not something to be proud of. Stop saying Aryan race. But it's still a trope that I don't understand why it's so normal to be mentioned. And you often hear it also in the Iranian diaspora. And about that, the Iranian diaspora, I was wondering whether, thinkers like Akhundzadeh, we mentioned earlier as one of the main thinkers of the, founders of Dislocative nationalism, if they started to gain momentum later on in some segments in the diaspora that we refer to usually as monarchist, part of the diaspora that are really close to Reza Pahlavi, as we've seen in the past weeks, especially.
Yes, so yes and no, in the sense that Akhundzadeh dies, if I remember correctly, in the 1860s.
Yeah.
So a long time ago. However, what happens is that the Pahlavi state takes on this ideology as its official ideology, as I mentioned earlier, and puts the full power of the state behind it in promoting it. So that's why I argue that dislocative nationalism is very much the dominant form of nationalism, the dominant form of identity in Iran. It's not the only one, but it's by far the most elaborate, complex, with one of the longest history. And of course, there are countless books and pamphlets that sort of like support its ideological framework. In Iran, it played, as we mentioned earlier, this role in making sense of the predicament of modernity. In the diaspora today, it comes in very handy in what I call about the diaspora, the Iranian diaspora's attempts to pose, or rather to bring about proximity with whiteness, essentially.
Yes.
To argue that we are whites, if not we are the original whites, as one sometimes hears. So it's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, that first of all shows that most diasporic, most members of the diaspora do not actually oppose the racial system of oppression. Unlike our peers coming into the United States or Canada or Australia or Western Europe from other parts of the world, other colonized parts of the world. We do not oppose racism. There are very few Iranians, in my experience as an anti-racist activist, in the ranks of anti-racist movement, sadly. There is a tendency to embrace it, to embrace racial violence, and then try their best to trumpet their internalized Islamophobia to signal to the white subject that we are no lesser people. We are just like you, the Aryan race, and so on. And in so doing, they, of course, threw all the victims of racial violence, including themselves, under the bus. And this has many manifestations that you can observe very easily One is the complete de-Islamization of the individual, from their first names to their sartorial appearance or how they dress, to their diet, to their cultural demeanor, and to their political positioning. Everything needs to be de-Islamized as much as possible. And that also applies to this habit of calling oneself Persian, or tattooing, the Pahlavi to signal your attachment to pre-Islamic Iran, which is entirely imagined in their case. It also means buying into the capitalist and even neoliberal order, attempting to buy one's way into white society through status, through income, and geographic residence. But most importantly, this attempt to claim parity with whiteness demands professing the most extreme forms of Islamophobia. The message is, we are like you. We hate Islam just as much as you do. We hate Arabs. And Iranians gladly lend themselves to Islamic political movements. There is not a single case of opposition to building a mosque anywhere in the Western world without, some Iranians being completely on board, as it were. There is not a single case of, these conspiracy theories of Islamization that I know so well and analyze day in, day out, where you don't have some Iranian, arguing, Islamization. Of course, I saw that happening in my country, so I can help with opposing it. And you find this across the board from California to Sweden and everywhere else. My view, as I hope an informed observer of Iranians and also a historian of not only Iran but racism, is that it does not work. You cannot fit into the model of whiteness. It is not open to you. You will get rewards, no doubt. You will get a little tap on your back
as long as you're useful.
Exactly. So that's what that's where I was going to get at. You're never a fully fledged white person in the sense that it is always conditional. Your humanity, your belonging to whiteness is always conditioned on not only your de-Islamization, but also on your profession of the vilest Western beliefs in the inferiority of Islam, the Middle East, and the rest of the world, and also on your subservience to Western geopolitical interests. A little bit like, before 1979, we didn't need visas because, we supported Western hegemony. So we were quite happy with the West's breadcrumbs, as it were. But none of this works because whiteness is based on domination. And, Neda Maqbouleh has done very interesting work on this in a wonderful book called The Limits of Whiteness, in which she argues that younger Iranians born in the United States that grow up there know instinctively that they are not white, that they are not treated as white, and they never will be. Our names, our physical features, our cuisine, the smell of our cuisine, our language will always give us up. Now, what about Zionism, right? So what role does Zionism play in all of this? Well, I think Zionism is essential in this diasporic endeavor to become white. There is nothing more structurally Western than Zionism, which is an ideology born in the West as a result of a Western historical experience, which is Western anti-Semitism. There is nothing more Western than the solution that Zionism provides to this problem, which is the creation of a violent, genocidal, settler colonial, Jewish supremacist state in the Middle East to solve that European problem, anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, at the expense of a largely Muslim population, the Palestinians, whose rights to their own land and even their very humanity, is disposable for the interests of Zionism.
It doesn't matter what they say, it never mattered what they had to reply, anything. It just was, there you go. We have to fix an injustice made over here, over you. So it's
exactly.
It's really
subhuman
compelling. Yeah.
is the word, which is never pronounced, but that's
Subhuman.
what it is. And not only that, in fact, the blame is shifted on them, given that. So I'm writing an
The
article, which
Mufti,
I
yeah.
hope will
With the
come out
Mufti.
soon, on what I call the Nazification of the Palestinians. So, you know, this whole discourse about the new anti-Semitism that we have around is very convenient for the Zionists, because it obviously legitimizes the colonization of Palestine. It legitimizes the theft of Palestinian land, their surveillance of Palestinians that live in Bantustans, and of course their genocide in the name of some sort of legitimate defense. You know, it's, you know, righteous what we are doing, because they're anti-Semites, and not only they are anti-Semites, but they were on board with the Holocaust. Look at the Mufti of Jerusalem. So it's all you know, very much interesting. But what we need to also bear in mind is that it's not only about the Palestinians and the Israelis or the Zionists. It's also about the Europeans. European consciousness is cleansed, as it were, cheaply, at the expense of the Palestinians, from the sin of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. So, you know, when you see these European politicians, you know, out and out Zionists, upholding the rights of Israel to defend itself, which is to exterminate other people, it is also because their own identity is dependent on this shifting of the blame onto them, so that they can go on, you know, and claim that they are members of you know, Judeo Christian civilization, which has brought liberty and emancipation to the world. And the Holocaust was a bit of a stain on that picture. And now, you know, thanks to Zionism and thanks to the shifting of the blame, it is somewhat cleansed. So it works very well for the Zionists and the Europeans at the expense of the victims.
And the Judeo-Christian thing that you mentioned, then we're going to get back to the dislocative nationalism, but the Judeo-Christian thing that you mentioned, it's so, because it just doesn't make any sense. It reduces so, like, centuries of persecution in Europe, also Christian persecution, but it also puts aside centuries of coexistence of Jews in other parts of the world with Muslims and with other communities, for example, in what we know now as the Middle East and North Africa. It doesn't make any sense historically. It reduces everything. Again, going back and reinterpreting history with anachronistic, you know, concepts. It wasn't like this, and now we want to build this union just to exclude Islam. It's so obvious that they want to just create this union that never was there. But going back again to the diaspora that we wanted to talk about, there's also a sort of ideological, you know, idealization. I've seen this so many times, like Cyrus the Great saving the Jews and recreate, like going back to a very ancient history and forgetting about all those instances again of coexistence of Jews and with Arabs and with Persians and with all the other Kurds and all the other communities in the area. So again, there's this weird jump to like thousands of years ago to create this bond that doesn't make much sense, even if we compare it, in my opinion, to Muhammad Reza Pahlavi's reign, because I'm not a Muhammad Reza Pahlavi fan, but he opposed the partition of Palestine. He voted for the resolution that was like considering racism, Zionism as a form of racism. And he collaborated on many instances with Israel, of course, but he, despite his rhetoric for the creation of an internal identity, he was aware of the fact that he was in the Middle East and he had Arab neighbors, and he had to be very careful in his approach towards the Palestine-Israel conflict, as much as he collaborated with Israel. So I see them just like reinterpreting history in a very, very weird way, even for the people that they claim to worship. So I keep seeing this fitting of history to their political aims that doesn't make any sense. What do you think about that?
I think you raised a few very good points. I think that the Shah kept his friendship with Israel quiet, in the sense that, you know, as we all know, the Israeli embassy doesn't have a plaque. and so on, and so all of it was quite discreet. However, the sort of like security collaboration with Israel ran very deep. And let us not forget that both Iran and Israel after 1967 and until 1979 are, alongside Israel, two of the pillars of American policy in the region. And let us not forget that the Shah, who benefited obviously from when the price of oil quadrupled,
Of
something that he
course.
didn't do much to achieve. I think that history has been slightly rewritten there. This was something that the radical Arab states did at the time. It was part of the oil embargo. But he actually actively undermined the process by selling oil to the Israelis. And when the revolution took place, he picked up the phone and called Moshe Dayan, and Moshe Dayan was flown into Tehran as if Moshe Dayan, was going to save the day or, find a solution to this problem called the 79 revolution. All of that being said, I think that there was something related but separate, which was the integration of Iranian Jews into Iranian society under the Pahlavis, which, to be fair, is something that they generally, thought of as important, and that's why they're also praised as, in the Pahlavi period is praised as the golden age of Iranian Jews. What is really strange is that, neither the idea of the ethnic nation nor the idea of the Aryan race have historically served the interests of Jews. So these are things that are lost in translation. And I find sometimes myself in, some of the bizarrest conversations with Iranian Jews in California, for instance, where this Iranian Jewish lady told me, we are the real Aryans, we Iranian Jews, because we didn't mix with Arabs. So tapping into the history of the Semitic and Aryan race, which was at work in the death camps of Nazi Germany, is again one of the bizarre things that dislocative nationalism has brought about. Now, on some of the propaganda that you mentioned, do Iranians have a special bond with Jews? Well, of course we have, and so have all our neighbors, in fact. And as you pointed out, the Middle East and North Africa do not have a history of anti-Semitism comparable to that of Europe. We do not have mass expulsions of Jews, such as, or there are a number of them, but the most important ones are England in 1290, France in 1394, and obviously Spain and then Portugal after 1492. We're talking about mass expulsions on a level never seen previously in world history, and but tremendously violent as well. There is a reason why after their expulsions from Iberia, Jews found refuge
where?
in states of North Africa or in Egypt and in the Ottoman Empire. The Jews of the Arab world and Iran did not go through recurrent cycles of exterminatory rage, such as the pogroms of Eastern Europe. And of course, we did not plan and execute the Holocaust. The Europeans did. But this, so we have a special bond, but this is a special bond that we share with our neighbors. Of course, colonialism and then Zionism changed the whole picture, and that's another discussion for another day. But that also highlights, the fact that this shifting of the accusation of anti-Semitism onto Muslims and Arabs and Palestinians and so on is, well, it's obviously historically baseless, but it plays a specific role. Let us bear in mind that ideology and nationalism, be it Zionism or dislocative nationalism or whatever, is not a science, is it? I mean, its main business is to distort the past and the world to serve specific interests. Now, on the more important points that or the more contemporary points that monarchists make. For instance, that Iran and Israel have common interests and common enemies and are natural allies. Nothing is farther from the truth. Only once you have completely internalized dislocative nationalism and imagine that a racialized Arab, shapeless mass is by definition the enemy of Iran, only then can you think of Israel as an ally. But forgive me, it's actually a very silly idea. But Israelis have understood this silly idea and have become very good at tapping into it by claiming, for instance, by saying all the things that they need to say to ingratiate themselves with dislocative nationalists and monarchists, that they like Cyrus the Great, that there is a street called Cyrus the Great in Tel Aviv and there's none in Tehran, and making all these claims while bombing us, or arguing that Iranians are a great nation, that they need to free themselves from the Islamic
occupation.
Yeah,
they call it the Islamic occupation.
Exactly.
So which is crazy.
It's really this kind of like Western epistemology of Islamophobic rewriting of history that is at play here. But the reality is that Israel is nobody's friend, and especially not Iran's. And this has been clear for everyone, any observer of Israel for many years, but it has become very obvious with their recent
genocide,
attacks,
on Iran even more.
Exactly. But one has to be blind to believe that to believe the Israeli propaganda about surgical strikes. In fact, the top brass of Israel's state and its genocidal IDF is characterized by what my Israeli colleague Hagai Ram calls Iranophobia, which is a view of the world informed by Islamophobia and the belief in the superiority of the Western model that needs to be imposed on everyone by the force of arms if necessary. It doesn't differentiate Iranians from Arabs, from Palestinians, and this is the opposite of this idea of common interests. As a matter of fact, it is quite clear that what the Israelis wish above everything else is neither an end to Iran's nuclear program, nor even the removal of the Islamic Republic, but rather an Iran that is simply incapable of posing any challenge to the US-Israeli hegemony of the region.
And just look at the region, and I think it's quite visible
exactly.
that...
Look at Syria, and you have the model that they are banking on. This is a Balkanized Iran, and Iran turned into a failed state, with each part of it ruled by different, but just as inoffensive faction or ethnic group or militia. What interest do the Israelis have in a strong Iran? Absolutely
zero.
None, from any perspective you look at it. Another point that I wanted to make, if you allow me,
absolutely,
is that as Iranians, we really need to understand that the genocide of the Palestinians is our genocide. It's a genocide against us as well. Let me explain. If you believe that Western Zionist colonial Islamophobia genuinely differentiates between Palestinians and Iranians, then you don't know your history. What allows for the genocide of the Palestinians to take place is, of course, Zionism and, of course, the support it has in the West and the arms and so on. But it's also, the indifference, the absolute indifference of the Euro-American masses and their ability to watch day in, day out, children be incinerated, aid seekers be shot at point blank, and entire populations starve to death if they are not bombed, and look the other way at best. At best, look the other way. At worst, jubilate. And this racial indifference towards what happens to the inhabitants of the Middle East, this selective empathy, this silent support for Israel's genocide, is a psychological response of historical Islamophobia. And, again, Islamophobia does not differentiate between Palestinians and Iranians or Arabs and Iranians, or even between Muslims and not Muslims. And
Absolutely.
I would like to remind my Iranian compatriots that during the 8 years of the Iran-Iraq war, the Western reaction to the massacre of both Iranian and Iraqi civilians was that same indifference. When the Americans shot down the Iran Air Flight 655, I think, in 1988, and close to 300 people who were on board, all civilians, were killed as a result. I remember it hardly registered in the news hour. And so it is the same indifference again that justifies in the minds of Western policymakers that Iranians should endure all sorts of economic hardship under the sanctions regime, or even be bombed to shreds by the Israelis, as long as Western interests are served, because that's the only thing that matters.
That matters.
I'm not denying that the Islamic Republic has a role to play in all of this. So I'm not completely erasing the agency of the Islamic Republic, but I think that attributing Iran's predicament today to the Islamic Republic entirely is missing, more than maybe half the picture. So as a result of everything that I just said, I think as Iranians, we must support Palestine, not only because opposing the slow starvation and incineration of an entire people is obviously the only principled position to have, and history will judge very severely those that did not have the right position, but also because the violence that is unleashed at the Palestinians and the violence that was unleashed at us occasionally, or could potentially be unleashed at us, is the same. Its nature is the same. And this is something that dislocative nationalism obscures with its infantile belief that we are part of the West, and that the West and Israel are our allies.
And I've seen like Iranians are very critical of their own internal politics, and they do criticize quite a lot, which I think it is kind of a healthy thing to do as citizens. But at the same time, I also think that it's totally beyond the point to be thinking that what Israel has done is a consequence of Magbad, like death to or chancellor, stuff like that are part of the rhetoric of the Islamic Republic. This is very much of the states in the region not being able to have a dignity or their own path towards self-determination, which we haven't completed yet in Iran, but we are having it, we're building it. And Zanzindagi Azadi, woman lang freedom, was a step into that, in my opinion, because Absolutely. It obliged them to actually realize that we have to deal with a mass of people that we cannot control at all, so we have to start dealing with it. And I think that this is our path towards self-determination. We don't know how it will go and how it will evolve throughout time, but Iranians are absolutely capable of doing that. But when I see that this, and I knew it at the time, honestly, because I know who many politicians talk to in Europe, when they were so, all that solidarity towards what was going on in Iran, which if one sees it is like great, they're nice to people that are ongoing mass repression from the government and from the authorities in the country. But at the same time, they were okay when the country bombing them was Israel or was one of themselves. You saw the leaders in Europe taking basically, except Norway and a few others, taking literally no, it's not even a position that you can justify in international law, because
supporting it.
Well, yeah, they were basically totally supporting what Israel has done. And it's, it's so unbelievable to see how that shifted. And since they know that it's a contradiction with their previous solidarity towards Iranians, especially women, this entire narrative started building that, oh yeah, because it's to free Iranian women, it's to free them from gender segregation, it's to bring democracy and all that. And I'm just like, you can have everything you want in Iran, but as long as you have sovereignty and territorial integrity, those are the threats to Western powers. That's their problem. They fear in Iran that can become, stronger and independent in the region. You just have to look the history of the other countries in the region to realize that and to see that that's their problem. And there's no way to please them. There's no way you can't play the wannabe white. It's not going to please them. And when you're not useful anymore, they're just going to trash you and you can go back to your previous position. That's the thing.
That's true. But see, I mean, I always saw the system of racial domination as also, among other things, a system of reward and punishment. And I think that those individuals do get some rewards. They do get some kudos. They do get some sort of advantage, out of their all-out embrace of Western Zionist interests, more than you and I. I mean, obviously, if you're an Iranian and on top of it, you're an anti-racist and you're pro-Palestine and you go to protests, so then you
that's me.
There is really nothing that can protect you from either police violence or discrimination and the full force of racial violence. But so it's the system of award and punishment that they try to play. However, perhaps what they do not realize is the glass ceiling that is right above their heads.
Yes.
There is I've been looking at this Iranian friend, if you want to call him so, of the British far right. I'm blanking on his name. His surname is Tusi. Something Tusi. It's profoundly disturbing to see him pose with the British far right, who are so happy to have the token brown man, to take selfies with, in order to then go on and argue and claim that the English.
See, I'm not racist. Yeah.
Not racist. And, he lends himself to this, with a whole lot of dislocative nationalist ideas about Islam and Persia and all of that. And what I find profoundly sad and to some extent disturbing is his lack of realization that he's being played, that he's instrumentalized. He plays a role in there. He plays a role in the politics of Tommy Robinson, arguing that he's not racist because my best buddy is Iranian and his name is Tusi. So yeah, I think that it's the glass ceiling and the conditionality of their belonging to whiteness that is perhaps lost to them. But that's also because their entire moral, ethical universe has been shaped by Western epistemologies and particularly Islamophobia.
Yeah. Well, then it was really lovely to talk to you. I thank you so much again. I think this happened at the best time because we were talking about this interview, but yeah, this was the best time perhaps just to provide people with some background. And I've been calling these people wannabe whites for quite a long, and it's amazing that it came out in this interview as well. So thank you once again. And,
thanks a lot. Thank you for having me. And I hope that your listeners will and viewers will find this to some extent useful in making sense of the world around us.
Totally. And I'm going to link your YouTube channel and handle and everything so they can find you and follow you as well.
Thank you so much.